Tank Man, the day one man stopped an army. There are images that stop time, not because they are beautiful, not because they are violent, but because they show us something we cannot explain, a depth of human will that exists outside the normal grammar of logic and fear. The photograph you are looking at right now was taken on the morning of June 5, 1989, on a wide boulevard called Chang'an Avenue, just outside Tiananmen Square in Beijing, China. A lone figure stands at the center of the frame. He is wearing a white shirt. He carries what appears to be plastic shopping bags, one in each hand. He looks, in every sense, like someone who simply stepped outside to run an errand. In front of him, a column of Type 59 battle tanks, stretching back as far as a camera can see. He did not throw anything. He did not shout. He did not carry a banner. He simply stood there. And something extraordinary happened. The tank stopped. One man. No armor. No weapon. Just will. And for a few minutes, it was enough. This video is a full story. The history behind that morning, the world that produced the man, the image that traveled the globe, and the question it still asks us today. The Tank Man of Tiananmen Square. The world before the photo. What was China in 1989? To understand Tank Man, you have to first understand the China he was born into. By 1989, China had been ruled by the Communist Party for exactly 40 years. Mao Zedong, the revolutionary leader who established the People's Republic in 1949, had reshaped every corner of Chinese society. Millions had died in the famine caused by the Great Leap Forward. Millions more had been persecuted during the Cultural Revolution. Entire generations had grown up in a country where questioning the party was not just dangerous, it was simply not done. Then, in the early 1980s, something shifted. The new leader, Deng Xiaoping, began cautious economic reforms. Foreign investment trickled in. Markets opened. A small but rapidly expanding middle class emerged in cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen. Young people, for the first time, began attending university in large numbers. They read books that had previously been banned. They studied economics, literature, and philosophy. They started asking questions. By 1989, a generation of Chinese students had grown up with just enough freedom to imagine more, but not enough freedom to actually have it. The spark? Death of a reformer. The event that ignited the protest was the death of Hu Yaobang on April 15, 1989, who had been the General Secretary of the Communist Party until 1987, when he was forced out for being too sympathetic to student demonstrators. Among reformers and intellectuals, he was widely admired. His death became the moment that gave permission for grief to become something louder. Students began gathering in Tiananmen Square, the vast, symbolic heart of Beijing, to mourn him. Within days, those gatherings had transformed into something the government had not anticipated, a structured, organized, and remarkably disciplined pro-democracy movement. At its peak, over 1 million people had joined the demonstrations. Not just students, workers, journalists, factory employees, teachers. The movement had spread to over 400 cities across China. And then, on May 20th, the government declared martial law. They had tried to mourn a man. They ended up demanding a future. The night of June 3rd to 4th. What happened next remains one of the most contested and suppressed historical events of the 20th century. In the early hours of June 4, 1989, the People's Liberation Army moved into Beijing with orders to clear Tiananmen Square and the surrounding streets. Soldiers and tanks rolled in from multiple directions. The exact number of people killed that night and in the days that followed has never been confirmed by the Chinese government. Estimates from credible international sources and leaked internal documents range from several hundred to potentially several thousand. The square itself was cleared. The protesters dispersed or arrested. The movement was over. By the morning of June 5th, Beijing was under heavy military occupation. The streets were quiet in the way that places become quiet after violence, not peaceful, but emptied. And it was into that silence that a single man walked. The moment. Chang'an Avenue, 10 a.m. Several Western photographers and journalists were still in Beijing that morning, staying at the Beijing hotel overlooking Chang'an Avenue. They were not supposed to be there. The government had been restricting press access, but they had not yet been removed. Four photographers captured a moment from their hotel windows. Jeff Widener of the Associated Press, Stuart Franklin of Magnum Photos, Charlie Cole of Newsweek, and Manuel Valls. Each had a different angle. Each captured something slightly different. But the image that became iconic, the one most people recognize, was Widener's. A column of Type 59 tanks was moving down Chang'an Avenue. These were not symbolic vehicles. They were weapons of war. Each one weighed roughly 36 tons and could fire armor-piercing rounds at targets over a kilometer away. The man stepped out into the road and stood in front of the lead tank. The tank slowed. It stopped. Then it attempted to move around him, to the left. The man stepped to his left, blocking it again. The tank moved to its right. The man stepped to his right. This back and forth, this quiet, almost gentle negotiation between a human body and 36 tons of steel lasted for several minutes. At one point, the man climbed up onto the tank itself, appearing to speak to the hatch. Then he descended and returned to standing in front of it. Eventually, he was led away from the road by several unidentified bystanders. The tanks continued. He did not stop the army. But for those few minutes, he made it hesitate. And a hesitating army is not the same as an unstoppable one. The photographs almost didn't survive. What most people don't know is how close these images came to being lost entirely. Charlie Cole, the Newsweek photographer, hid his film rolls in the toilet tank of his hotel bathroom when Chinese security forces came to confiscate materials. His instinct proved right. Agents searched his room and took a decor roll of film. The real photograph survived only because of where he hid them. Stuart Franklin smuggled his film out of the country by giving it to a French student to carry out. Jeff Widener had been struck in the face by a stray rock the previous night and was operating with a mild concussion, borrowing a 400mm telephoto lens from a colleague because his own equipment had been damaged. The image that shaped a generation was captured by a man who was injured, with borrowed equipment, hiding from authorities, from a window he technically wasn't supposed to be standing at. History does not always announce itself neatly. Who was he? The most famous unknown person in history. In the decade since 1989, dozens of investigators, journalists, and human rights organizations have tried to identify the man in the photograph. None have succeeded definitively. His anonymity is, in some ways, a tribute to how thoroughly China has suppressed a memory of June 4th. Within China, the photograph is heavily censored. The events of Tiananmen Square are removed from textbooks, blocked from the internet, and scrubbed from public discourse so completely that a substantial portion of young Chinese citizens have no knowledge that the protests ever occurred. Several names have been floated over the years. In 1990, a man identified by some sources as Wang Weilin, a 19-year-old student, was named, but this was never confirmed, and no reliable evidence has ever been produced to support it. In 2012, a reporter for a British newspaper believed he had tracked down a man in his 60s living in a Beijing apartment. That lead was never confirmed either. The Chinese government's own account of what happened to him has been inconsistent. In 1990, spokesman Yuan Mu stated that the man had never been killed. Later official statements implied he had been arrested. Neither was supported with evidence. We gave him a name he never asked for, Tank Man. It describes what he faced, but tells us nothing about who he was. What we can reasonably infer, based on the visual evidence, researchers believe he was likely in his late 20s to mid-30s. His posture and bearing suggest someone who had made a deliberate decision, not an impulsive one. The shopping bags he carried, a mundane, domestic detail, have been interpreted by some historians as evidence that he was not a premeditated protester, but an ordinary citizen who made an extraordinary choice in the moment. Others have suggested the shopping bags could have been a deliberate prop, a statement that daily life must continue even in the shadow of military occupation. We do not know. We may never know. What we do know is this: he made a choice. Whatever was in those bags, whatever he had planned for his day, at some point he stepped off the pavement and into the road. And for those minutes, he became something larger than a name could contain. How the image changed the world. Before the internet, it is difficult, in the age of instant virality, to fully appreciate what it meant for this photograph to travel the world in 1989. There was no Twitter, no Instagram, no smartphone cameras. The image traveled through wire services, physical telegraph and telex networks, to newspaper offices in London, New York, Paris, and Tokyo. It appeared on front pages across the globe within 24 hours of being taken. By the following weekend, it had run on the covers of Time magazine, Newsweek, and newspapers in over 50 countries. In an era before digital sharing, this photograph achieved something close to total cultural saturation. Time magazine later named it one of the 100 most influential photographs of the 20th century. Life magazine included it among the 100 photographs that changed the world. It won the World Press Photo of the Year award. All of this from a single frame taken through a hotel window by a man with concussion and borrowed equipment. The symbol that outlived its moment. What is striking about the image's longevity is how it has been reinterpreted across cultures and contexts. In the United States, it became a symbol of individual liberty against state power. In Eastern Europe, where communist regimes were also collapsing in 1989, it was read as a mirror of local struggles. In Latin America, where dictatorships were giving way to fragile democracies, it resonated as an emblem of what one person could represent. It has been reproduced in paintings, sculptures, and murals on every inhabited continent. It has been referenced in films, novels, academic papers, political speeches, and protest signs. It has been projected onto government buildings. It has been tattooed on skin. At the 2008 Beijing Olympics, protesters attempted to recreate the image with their own bodies near the Olympic torch relay route. At the 2019 Hong Kong protests, 30 years after Tiananmen, demonstrators held up recreations of the image as a direct link across generations of resistance. The image survived every attempt to erase it. That, too, is a form of defiance. Within China, the photograph remains inaccessible on the domestic internet. When young Chinese students encounter it for the first time, often through VPNs or travel abroad, the reaction is frequently one of disbelief. Not at the tanks, but at the fact that they had never been allowed to see it. The photograph is, therefore, not just a record of one man's courage. It is itself an ongoing act of resistance against the attempt to make that courage disappear. The philosophy of the moment, what quiet courage actually looks like. There's a phrase that gets used too often and understood too rarely, moral courage. We tend to imagine it as something dramatic, the person who charges into a burning building, the whistleblower who goes to the press knowing they will lose everything, the dissident who speaks at a political rally with soldiers in the crowd. But Tank Man's courage was different. It was quiet. It was almost conversational. He did not attack the tank. He did not make a speech. There is no record of him shouting slogans. What we see in the film footage, yes, there is video in addition to the photographs, is a man who appeared almost calm, firm, resolved. He moved with the tank like someone engaged in a slow, persistent argument. Not a fight, an argument. His body language said, "I'm not going to let you pretend I am not here." That is a specific kind of courage. Philosophers call it witnessing, the act of refusing to allow something to happen without acknowledgement. He could not stop the tanks ultimately. He could not reverse what had happened the night before. But he could refuse to allow the machinery of power to move through the world as though no one saw it. Courage is not always about stopping something. Sometimes it is only about being seen trying. The paradox of power. There is something philosophically fascinating about what the photograph reveals. The tank is designed to project absolute power. Its purpose, its entire reason for existing, is to make opposition feel futile. The visual logic of a tank is, do not resist, because resistance is impossible. Tank Man dismantled that logic not by overpowering the tank, but by refusing to accept its terms. He did not have to win. He only had to stand there. And in standing there, he revealed something the tank's designers had never anticipated, that a machine built to project power is also, by definition, a machine that can be made to hesitate. That the moment the tank stops, the illusion of its irresistibility stops with it. For the soldiers inside that lead tank, this was also a rupture. They had been given orders. The orders did not account for this. Whatever those soldiers were, human beings, frightened, trained, conflicted, they face a man who was not behaving according to the script that their training had prepared them for. He disrupted the script. And disrupting the script is the first move in any story of change. Erasure and memory. China's 40 years of forgetting. In the years since 1989, the Chinese Communist Party has pursued one of the most systematic campaigns of historical erasure in modern history. The phrase June 4th, let alone Tiananmen, let alone Tank Man, is scrubbed from the Chinese internet by an army of automated sensors and human monitors. Search results return nothing. Social media posts are deleted within seconds of going up. Textbooks published in China do not mention the protests. Museum exhibitions skip from 1988 to 1990. Every year on June 4th, the vigil held in Victoria Park in Hong Kong, for decades the largest annual commemoration of the Tiananmen massacre anywhere in the world, drew tens of thousands of participants carrying candles in the dark. It was one of the few places on Chinese soil where June 4th was acknowledged openly. In 2020, that vigil was banned, initially on COVID grounds and subsequently on national security grounds following the introduction of Hong Kong's national security law. The organizers of the vigil were arrested. The museum they maintained, the June 4th Museum, was forced to close. The erasure is ongoing. It is active. It is not the passive fading of historical memory, but the deliberate, continuous work of making something new and rememberable. You can erase a name from a textbook. You cannot erase the shape of what it means to stand alone. Why memory matters here. Here is the uncomfortable truth about historical erasure. It often works, at least for a generation. Studies of Chinese youth attitudes toward Tiananmen consistently show that a significant majority of mainland Chinese people under 40 have no substantive knowledge of what happened in June 1989. This is not ignorance by choice. It is a product of an educational and informational environment engineered to produce exactly that result. And yet the photograph persists. The image leaks through. It shows up on encrypted messaging apps. It circulates in diaspora communities. It is projected on buildings in Taipei, Berlin, and San Francisco on every anniversary. The photograph has become a kind of proof of concept, evidence that even the most powerful act of historical suppression cannot permanently seal off a moment of human witness. Memory, it turns out, is also a form of resistance, smaller versions of the same moment. The question the photograph asks you: at some point in almost every life, there's a version of this moment. It rarely involves tanks. Most of us will spend our entire lives without facing the specific, terrifying choice that Tank Man faced on a June morning in Beijing. For that, we should be genuinely grateful. But the structure of the choice, stand or step aside, repeats itself at every scale. There is the employee who watches a colleague be treated unfairly in a meeting and decides whether to speak. There is a student who sees someone being excluded or humiliated and decides whether to say something or look away. There is a person who knows that something dishonest is happening in their organization and decides whether their comfort is worth more than their integrity. None of these situations involve tanks. All of them involve the same essential question. When the cost of standing up is real and the reward is uncertain, do you stand up anyway? The myth of the heroic moment. One of the most persistent lies that culture tells us about courage is that it announces itself clearly. In films, the heroic moment arrives with swelling music and a close-up. In biographies, it is set apart from the mundane details of ordinary life. We are conditioned to believe that when the moment comes, we will feel ready. We will have prepared. We will know that this is it. Tank Man had shopping bags. He was not prepared, or at least there is no evidence he was. He was not wearing armor. He had not given an interview the night before about his convictions. He was, by every visible measure, an ordinary person on an ordinary morning who stepped into the road. The great challenge of courage is not the dramatic test. It is the unannounced one, the moment that arrives while you are still carrying your groceries, still in the middle of your ordinary Tuesday, still wearing your ordinary clothes. Readiness is a luxury. The test does not always wait for you to be ready. Courage does not always feel like courage when you are living it. Sometimes it just feels like deciding not to look away. Legacy and the long arc. What happened to China afterward? The Tiananmen Square protests were crushed. That is a blunt, unavoidable fact. The Chinese government consolidated its power in the months and years following June 1989. Thousands of activists, students, and workers were arrested. Many were sentenced to prison terms of decades. Some fled the country and spent years in exile. A diaspora of dissidents spread across North America, Europe, and Australia. Deng Xiaoping continued his economic reforms, and China's economy grew at extraordinary speed throughout the 1990s. Within 2 decades, China had become the world's second largest economy. The argument made, implicitly, by the party was that stability and prosperity were more important than the liberties that the protesters had demanded. Whether that trade-off was accepted, rejected, or simply enforced upon the population is a question that cannot be answered in aggregate. It lives in the private conscience of over 1 billion individual people. What we can say is that the protest did not succeed in the direct sense. No democratic reforms followed. No government accountability was established. No independent investigation into the events of June 4th has ever been permitted. And yet, the image traveled. The world saw. And the world's relationship with China, its governments, its companies, its academic institutions, its journalists, has never entirely separated itself from the moral weight of what that photograph represents. What happened to the photographers? Jeff Widener returned to the United States and continued his career at the Associated Press. He has given hundreds of interviews about the photograph over the decades. He has said, in various ways, that he is still processing what he was present for. Charlie Cole won the World Press Photo of the Year award for 1989. He died in 2019 in Fiji at the age of 64. Stuart Franklin went on to a distinguished career at Magnum Photos. He has spoken often about the ethical weight of documenting moments of historical violence and resistance. What is striking about these three men is that each of them has described, in separate interviews, a version of the same feeling. That they were witnesses of something they did not fully understand in the moment, and that the understanding has continued to arrive over the decades since. There are experiences that do not finish happening when they happen. They keep unfolding inside you. Closing. What we carry forward. History is not a record. It is a decision. Every generation inherits a set of images, stories, and moments that shape the world they were born into. What they do with those inheritances, whether they examine them, interrogate them, honor them, learn from them, or allow them to fade, determines what gets carried forward into the next generation. Tank Man is, among other things, a test. He is a test of whether we believe individual human beings matter against the weight of systems and institutions and armies. He is a test of whether we think one person, standing alone, in the middle of the road, accomplishes anything at all. The honest answer is, we don't know. We don't know what he thought he was doing. We don't know if he believed he would survive. We don't know if he thought his action would change anything, or if he had simply reached a point where he could not imagine doing otherwise. But we know the photograph exists. We know that 36 tons of armored steel stopped in front of one person's body and, for a few minutes, could not find a way to go forward. That happened. It is documented. It is real. You cannot happen a moment of courage. Even when everything else is erased, the shape of what happened leaves a mark. Tank Man's name is unknown. His fate is unknown. Whether he survived the day, the week, the year, unknown. But his moment survived. It crossed borders that were closed to him. It outlived governments that tried to erase it. It reached people in countries he had never heard of, speaking languages he did not know, in circumstances he could not have imagined. A man with shopping bags pours an army. Not forever, but long enough for the world to see. And sometimes, just sometimes, being seen is where everything begins. If this story stayed with you, if you found yourself thinking about what you would have done in that moment, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not for the algorithm, because this is the kind of story that belongs to everyone. Subscribe if you want more stories about the moments when ordinary people change the extraordinary course of history. And leave a comment telling me, what was your version of the Tank Man moment? When did you have to decide whether to stand or step aside? Hit that like button. It tells YouTube this content matters and helps it reach people who need to hear it. Drop a comment below. Tell me which law hit hardest for you. I read every single one, and your insights help shape future episodes. Share this with someone who's tired of being reactive, someone who's ready to think strategically instead of emotionally, and subscribe to History Maker Stories, because this is just the beginning. We're building something different here. Not quick tips, not surface-level motivation, deep strategy, mental discipline, historical wisdom applied to modern life. We don't rush. We rebuild the mind first. I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, stay intentional, stay composed, stay untouchable. History is not something that happened to other people. It is being made right now, by us, by our choices. by what we decide to remember and what we carry forward.